Mr. Moore used the term blameless 4 times by my count. He said that our defense is that we're asking you to hold Mr. Reinking blameless. That's not our defense. Our defense is that we ask you to hold him not guilty by reason of insanity. We have not disputed what he did, not in jury selection, not in opening statement, not in this trial. We never did say that he wasn't responsible for the deaths and the injuries and what happened at Waffle House. Our defense is that he was legally insane at the time and therefore is not guilty by reason of insanity. We live in the state of Tennessee. It's a good and decent state. And in a good and decent state, in this state, the legislature has put in place laws that allow for individuals who are severely mentally ill, and as a result of that, commit acts and without the understanding that the acts that they're committing are wrong, the legislature has put in place a procedure for those people, for these mentally ill people. And that's because people that are this severely mentally ill that can't understand the wrongfulness of their actions do not belong in a prison. Now, you were told that you can't consider, if you find him not guilty by reason of insanity, what's going to happen to him. You can't factor that in. But you've also been told, and it's in the jury instructions, that you know he will be detained if you find him not guilty by reason of insanity. He does not walk out of this courtroom. He is automatically detained, and there will be other medical and legal proceedings. So the defense is not hold him blameless. The defense is to find him not guilty by reason of insanity. On April the 22nd of 2018, there's really no dispute that Travis Reinking was suffering from schizophrenia. He was having delusions, hallucinations, disorganized thoughts. He acted on what he believed to be a command from God to go to the Waffle House and shoot 3 people, and that he was doing so in self-defense because of the harassment and stalking and hacking and everything that was happening to him. Now that sounds totally crazy. And that's because it is crazy. But none of us are schizophrenics. We can't possibly understand the suffering that he was going through or understand what was going on in his mind. That's why we brought experts in here to explain it. Now we know that Mr. Reinking has been suffering from schizophrenia for years. How do you know that? Well, we brought in information to you through the experts and the things that they had reviewed. Dr. Eisen talked about how he was having delusions back in 2015 of alien encounters, communicating with aliens, helping aliens fight a war. In May of 2016, Mr. Reinking thought that Taylor Swift had come to his little town of Morton, Illinois, and was there to harass him. And he went out looking for her with his mother, looking for Taylor Swift in Morton, Illinois. He obviously, something was wrong, so the ERS was called and they responded, and then he ended up being hospitalized because of these delusions and this schizophrenia. He was released. Eventually, he goes to Colorado And in March of 2017, when he's in Colorado, he's having these same delusions, and he reaches out for help to law enforcement by calling 911. And you heard Dr. Wood tell you about that, how he was saying that he's continuing to be stalked by Taylor Swift and stalked on the internet, and that he thinks that the police are actually involved out to get him. You heard there was a reference on the cross-examination of Eisen about in May 17 when Mr. Reinking was writing this journal, and referred to as a book, I think is what we refer to. And you heard how he said he was questioning his own sanity and wondering himself, is he crazy with all of these delusions? A month later, in June of 2017, my understanding is coming out where he lives and is going to work, something along those lines, and had a pink robe or pink dress on, talking about whether or not he's a man. And then the same day, he goes to the community swimming pool in this same pink robe, pink dress with his underwear on, makes all these statements, jumps in the pool, gets out, and exposes himself. This man's not in his right mind. The next month, on July the 7th, he is suffering so bad from this schizophrenia that he says, I've tried to call law enforcement, I've tried to reach out, I'm going to go see the President of the United States and tell him myself I need help. And he sees nothing wrong with going literally to Washington, D.C. to walk on the White House grounds, to try to go into the White House to talk to the President of the United States about helping him.
All right, heading to Washington, D.C. to the president. Taylor Swift is stalking him, all of his weird behavior that went overlooked. The defense is sharing their story. You won't miss a thing. We have to fit in a quick break. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Matt Johnson. So right now we're hearing the defense and those closing arguments being brought by attorney Paul Bruno. And in his storytelling, he keeps using these two words that I keep hearing from him: crazy and suffering. Let's listen together and what else he has to say.
You saw and you heard that roughly the fall, August, September of 2017, that he started making these videos, these YouTube videos. And in these YouTube videos, you heard it was described, I think there was 30 of them, and that there's over and over and over, he's angry, he's scared, there's all these issues. We played you one of them to get a flavor of what's on there. You could see the madness. He eventually moves to Nashville in roughly February of 2018. Still having these intense delusions, these intense hallucinations, this paranoia. They're out to get him, they're out to hurt him. He believes people, while he's not there, are breaking into his apartment, messing with his computer, taking his passwords, hacking the internet. He's not in the real world in his mind. Only 5 days before the Waffle House incident, he goes to the BMW dealership. I don't have to walk you through what happened there. But the most interesting, perhaps the most significant part of that whole incident is when the salesperson said, I was with him for about 5 minutes outside the car, with him about 8 or 9 minutes. And after he took the car, I went inside, and the other people inside said, was he on drugs? Was he on alcohol? And it hit her. She remembered, I've had a friend suffering from schizophrenia for 7 years. And the interaction she had with Mr. Reinking, her words were, it did seem to parallel. She's noticing it 5 days beforehand. The police do this pursuit for 2 minutes, 1.5 miles, 40 to 50 miles per hour. and they pull off of him. And as you heard, that made him wonder what's going on. The police knew I took the car. They were right behind me. What is going on? That added to his schizophrenic issues. You saw his apartment. You could see pictures of this apartment where this man lives at this particular time. He had a folding chair, a computer desk chair, a bunch of computers, phones, things like that, sleeping on the floor, not a couch, nothing. He, I would say, is at the height of his schizophrenic delusions, hallucinations, disorganized thoughts, paranoia. And then he believes, he wakes up in the morning, I think he said, and he asked for guidance, and then he believes that God tells him to go to the Waffle House, wear only a green jacket, take your gun with you, and kill 3 people. The people at the Waffle House are with the CIA and the FBI, and they're out to get him, and he must act in self-defense. He said that if, in effect, I'm going to do what I believe God is telling me to do, but if I'm mistaken in what God is telling me to do, God will make the Waffle House be closed, make nobody be there, make my gun jam. He's in turmoil, but he believes that God has told him, you need to go there and do this as an act in self-defense because of all the torment and the harassment that you are receiving. Again, to us, it's totally crazy. But to him, it's reality. They talked about choices. And my co-counsel in the opening statement talked about choices are based on your perception. How do you perceive things? Well, when you're a schizophrenic and you're in Travis's world, you don't perceive things like normal people do. Mr. Reinking gets into his truck, his own truck, registered to him, that has paperwork in it identifying him, where he lives, and he drives to the Waffle House. He does park in the front. There's no question about that. Now, the state would have you believe that, well, he parks right in the front where he can see everything going on in the Waffle House. I disagree with that. I'll show you this picture just real quick. I'm not saying that you can't see in part of the Waffle House from where he parks, but the state trying to sell you that he parked right in the front where he could see everything going on in the Waffle House is simply not accurate. You can just look at the picture and tell that. He sits right there. You can pull the picture. He sits right there, and he sits in the car, and he's waiting on a sign. And while he is sitting there with nothing on but this jacket, Mr. McMurray and Mr. Shaw walk by. And if you remember, Mr. McMurray looked at him, and he said that he had a piercing stare. Mr. Reinking, it didn't seem right. He looks like the person who would shoot up a place. James Shaw came in and said, well, what Mr. McMurray really said testified, and this was very interesting, he had that same look on his face as he does today. And I would imagine y'all have been looking at Mr. Reinking this entire week, at least at some points in time. Mr. Reinking is sitting there and he says, I'm looking for a sign. I'm looking for a sign. The blinking hazard lights come on, and he says, those are taunting me. But then he sees the sign. Mr. Perez walks by with a hat on, and that hat has a number 3 on it. This picture is the picture I gave, the first picture that I gave to Dr. Deering to show.
All right, so right there you have defense attorney Paul Bruno delivering their portion of closing arguments and their story that they're telling. We're approaching the top of the hour, so we're going to slip in a break, but we're going to pick up where we left off. You're watching Court. And welcome back to Court TV Live on this busy Friday morning. I'm Matt Johnson in for Ted Rollins. Well, it's the top of the hour, and right before the break, we were in closing arguments in the Tennesse versus Travis Reinking trial, the Waffle House murders. The defense has the podium. Let's go back inside.
Dr. Deering to show all the clothing that was taken, and he described a black hat and a blue hat polo. They both had number 3s on it. I blew up one of them so that you can see it better, where you can clearly see the number 3. And if you recall, there was testimony that Mr. Reinking was obsessed with the number 3. He sent 333 starbursts to Taylor Swift. He talks about the Holy Trinity. He talks about him and his 2 wives, although he doesn't even have one. He would talk about the 3 of us, I think with Dr. Eisen, meaning me, Celine, and Crystal. But sometimes the 3 of them were me, Celine, and Crystal through Dr. Eisen. He believes he's given the sign, and he gets out, and we all watched what he did. Now, one thing I want to bring up that I thought was interesting that the state brought up on cross-examination was with Miss Eisen, and we've heard about cross-examination of Miss Eisen. Miss Eisen, isn't it something to the effect about Mr. Reinking wearing a disguise? A disguise is what she was trying to sell. That he disguised himself by being naked. I would say that could be the worst disguise that anybody could ever have. Maybe you could have put on jeans, a shirt, a jacket or something. And if an APB goes out saying there's a guy in jeans and a shirt and a jacket or a hat or whatever, you might blend in with some other people. But when the APB goes out and it says there's a naked man running down the street, that's not a very good disguise. But the state would try to couch that and sell you that look at this choice of his disguise. He leaves the scene, and at first, and the description was he ran away. And that's why we asked questions to several people about, did he run away or did he walk away? And there was several of them that said he walked away. James Shaw, trotted away or fast-paced walk. James Shaw said saw him walking down the shoulder of the road. Kayla Shaw, walking on the shoulder of the road without any clothes on Murfreesboro Road. Chelsea Owens, in the grass area not too far off the road. Officer Gilpin with his K9 Brax tracked a scent, if you remember, in the grass right next to the road. So Mr. Reinking, in this fleeing, walks almost a mile naked down the side of Murfreesboro Pike. If you recall, Mr. Reinking had driven his own vehicle to the scene, and we had, on cross-examination of Ms. Connor, we pointed out that the keys were in the ignition. And she herself said, we were wondering, why didn't he leave in his own vehicle? That's a great question. Why didn't he leave in his own vehicle? because he's out of his mind. He leaves the vehicle there with all identifying information of who he is. He leaves the scene, and you heard the testimony that he was afraid that the police would come. He's already got this paranoia of them, and that they would come for him. And he has this paranoia of the police and the government, and so he flees. He goes and gets this thing, and he puts this backpack together, and he's caught. And you heard about the backpack. I'm gonna come back around to that backpack, but I want to address two other issues real quick before the backpack. I thought it was interesting that Detective Summerall said this was the easiest homicide ever to solve. Gun, video, Travis Reinking's truck on the scene. Of course it was. It's committed by a person with a severe mental illness. Of course it would be easy to solve. Another issue before we move on that I want to address, because it comes up kind of chronologically here, is when Mr. Shaw took the stand and he was testifying, and he said that when he went outside that he heard Mr. Reinking make this racial statement. I don't know why he said that, but we put on proof through the detective Clara that when they interviewed Mr. Shaw 3 days after the incident, Mr. Shaw himself said twice, I never heard him say anything racial. Not once, but twice. Told the law enforcement, I never heard him say anything racial. But when he testified, all of a sudden we have that statement. So I just want you to keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. So we get back to the backpack. Now this backpack, the idea, if you believe what the state is saying, and that Mr. Reinking was going to take this backpack and somehow he was going to make his way to Canada. In the backpack, there's water, silver bars. Silver bars. There's a gun, but did you hear what the ballistics experts say? It's not in normal operating condition. And there's a Bible in the backpack. And that would make total sense from a man who thinks he's being commanded by God to do things. He'd have a tough time going to Canada without his passport that was left in the safe when you saw it was opened up in front of you. I think there was actually more than one. So is that really what was going on here? This plan to go to Canada? And the safe. Now that was interesting. Detective Summerall, the lead guy in this whole thing, took the stand and he said, yeah, I looked in the safe in Mr. Reinking's apartment and I found the BMW key. It was in the safe. And the state introduced the safe. So then we asked him to come out here. Was there anything else in the safe? No, not that I can remember. I don't remember anything else being in the safe. No, I don't know if there's anything else in the safe. Don't remember anything in there. That BMW key. Okay, well, let's look. So what's in the safe that was found inside Mr. Reinking's apartment? A letter to Oprah Winfrey asking for help with his situation with Taylor Swift. A letter to Taylor Swift. There's other letters. You can read them. They're in evidence at this point. But to Summerall, apparently that wasn't significant in this case. That's not important in a case dealing with insanity. Just that BMW key is. But he had those in his apartment when they searched it. Let's talk about motive briefly. The motive is not, you heard early on, state likes to say, oh, motive's not, we don't have to prove motive, and they don't. But it's on some level, you have to look at a case and say, what could possibly be the motive for doing this? The state has pitched to you, even today, even today, the motive was that he had stolen this BMW and somebody had taken that BMW, and out of revenge, he went to the Waffle House and did what he did. Really? He was so angry that they took that BMW that he went to the Waffle House with that gun with nothing but a jacket on and shot all those people? That's the motive? Or was, in his mind, was he commanded by God to do those specific things? Now the experts. So, it should be pretty clear by now that before we even came on this case, the court ordered these experts to evaluate Mr. Reinking. That is the procedure we have in Davidson County. Now, defense attorneys can go out and hire somebody to do that, but there is a mechanism in place that for the courts to send people to Vanderbilt and eventually the Middle Tennessee Mental Health Institute, if necessary, for them to be evaluated. And that's done so that independent evaluations can be done. Not bought and paid for by the state, not bought and paid for by the defense, an independent evaluation. So he first goes to Vanderbilt University, and the case is assigned to Dr. Wood. Dr. Wood is one of 7 people in this entire state that's board certified in forensic pathology. She has done, she said, I believe it was nearly 900 of these evaluations.
Is the defense convincing the jury? Are they convincing you that Reinking was not physically fit, mentally fit when all of this went down, legally insane? Let us know on social media. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Matt Johnson in for Ted today. So where we left off, we're going to pick right back up. It's defense attorney Paul Bruno delivering his closing.
And what she does is she says, I gather records, I gather reports, I get any information I can get, videos, whatever else, from the state and from the defense. And I conduct interviews and I meet with colleagues. And I do my evaluation, and I come back with my opinion. And in this case, her opinion is that at the time of the offense, Mr. Reinking suffered from a severe mental disease or defect, that being schizophrenia, and that he could not appreciate the wrongfulness of his actions. We had Dr. Eisen. Dr. Eisen, again, it's the same thing. Once Mr. Reinking is finished at Vanderbilt, he was sent for inpatient evaluation over a period of roughly 30 days or so, and then I think it continued after that, with the team at the Middle Tennessee Mental Health Institute. And they do the same type of thing, reviewing things, reviewing records, reviewing reports, and then they, with a collaborative effort, come up with an opinion and a report. And MTMHI came up specifically, Dr. Eisen, Dr. Kovach, who you heard had been there for over 20 years, and Dr. Fikes, all collaborated, adopted, and signed off on the report, with the opinion being that Mr. Reinking suffered from a severe disease or mental defect, that being schizophrenia, and that he could not appreciate the wrongfulness of his actions. 3 doctors from MTMHI signed off on that opinion. 3 doctors. You heard about how the interactions with Mr. Reinking there, that he was continuing to suffer some delusions while he was being treated at MTMHI. You heard about hallucinations. He thought that the government was trying to kill him. The question was asked, with these delusions and hallucinations and disorganized thoughts, do schizophrenics believe them wholeheartedly? And she said yes. And I think the question was asked, even if there's proof to the contrary shown to them, they still believe it in their mind. She said while he was at MTHI, he would talk out loud and have conferences with aliens. Heard voices of aliens, thought he was married to a supernatural being. He said any logical person would see that what I did was self-defense. Mr. Moore mentioned something about the cross-examinations, and specifically cross-examinations of Dr. Eisen. And I want to briefly talk about some of the things on these cross-examinations that I thought was somewhat peculiar. If you recall, when Dr. Wood was cross-examined by Mr. Dowdy, there came a point in time where this handwritten journal was brought out, and they were going through certain parts of it. And they got to page 13, and they read what was on page 13, and Mr. Dowdy said, there's nothing in there about a command from God. You don't see anything there about a command from God. Where's that? You don't see anything about that. And then he moved on. But I was paying attention. So when I got up on my redirect, I asked her to turn one more page to page 14. And there's the whole command from God, the whole thing. She read it out to you. He's had the journal. We all have the journal. We've all read the journal. But he asked her a question, where is that? She doesn't know off the top of her head, and then he moves on, knowing it's on the very next page. He asked her about exhibitionism and sadomasochism, and I don't know if you caught it, but he said, as far as exhibitionism is, well, he took his own pants off before he left the house, and he went to the Waffle House and harmed people. Is he trying to say that this was some sort of sexual thing with exhibitionism and sadomasochism? Miss Norman cross-examined Dr. Eisen. And there came a point in time when she said, Dr. Eisen, look on this page at this line. What did Mr. Reinking say to you? And you heard the racial slur, the racial statement. And you could hear an audible gasp in this courtroom. Clearly giving the impression that it was Mr. Reinking that statement originated from. Clearly giving that impression. But again, Mr. Evans, on his toes, paying attention, knowing the facts, got up on cross-examination and said, Dr. Eisen, read the rest of that line. What does that say? Mr. Reinking was telling me what somebody else had said at the Waffle House. Now, had we not been on our toes paying attention, you would have been left with the impression that that's what he said at the time of the killing. We had to come forward and give you the context. It was brought up. Miss Eisen, at some point, Mr. Reinking showed a fondness for you. He was into you. He liked you, whatever the words were, the fondness with you. The fondness was, according to her, is, yeah, he thought that his wife was inside her body, that he was talking to his wife.
Did you just see that right now? The other defense attorney with the beard and the glasses sitting right next to Reinking, and he was almost mouthing things. I wonder how much this was rehearsed by Mr. Bruno in their office. We're going to slip in a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Court TV Live. So right now we're in the middle of closing arguments and we're listening to the defense attorney, Paul Bruno. So he's talking about aliens, Oprah, and Taylor Swift. But what really sticks out and what he's been mentioning more is this, I wrote it down, could not appreciate the wrong or rightfulness of his actions. That's what this is about. Let's go back to court.
But if you were left with just this fondness, you would have this picture, something funny was maybe going on. But this fondness was an active delusion. At one point in time, there was cross-examination about Miss Ison. You didn't put this in your report, did you? Where is it in your report? You didn't put this in your report. And what she was talking about was actually in the earlier report. Miss Ison had put certain things in her reports, but Miss Norman was trying to cross-examine her like, you didn't put it in your report. You didn't put it in your report. And speaking of reports, she was cross-examined about this wasn't in a report, this wasn't in a report, this wasn't in a report. Those reports are summaries. They're not transcripts. They also thought that initially, and we have to clean this up when we get back up, oh, he refused to take the test. So you couldn't give him the malingering test because he refused to take it. Leaving an impression that somehow Mr. Reinking knew what was coming and said, oh, I'm not taking the malingering test. But we have to get back up and clear this stuff up. That he didn't know what the test was, had no idea. He was just refusing to take the test. So I bring all that up because it's significant. When we're trying to bring to you the facts of this case and the whole picture, and when some of these cross-examinations are bringing to you a misperception, that is significant in this case. This is serious, very serious. And to do things in a manner that don't give you the whole picture or the complete context is not right. The state called 7 what were supposed to be rebuttal witnesses. Now, rebuttal is basically we put on our case, and then they're supposed to get up and put on proof that would contradict our case. That's what rebuttal proof is supposed to be. So they put on the BMW people, the 2 officers, and the salesperson deposition, which we didn't really dispute any of that, but I still thought it was interesting because you got to hear the salesperson say, yeah, he appeared to be schizophrenic. He appeared to be acting as just like my friend when my friend has a break. Then we had Summerall, who was pretty much off the stand as quickly as he was on it. And then we had the silver bar guy come in. And the silver bar guy just said, yeah, he bought some silver bars from me. Wasn't very complicated or long. He was polite and shy, and he came back and picked them up. I have no idea what their rebuts. Then we had the 2 officers who brought in the styrofoam drawings. You've seen them. They're in evidence. And the second one has a spaceship, a flying saucer on it. This is a year later. Almost a year later, has a flying saucer with 3 aliens in it. I would submit that supports my case. Doesn't rebut my case. So you saw 7 people. But who did you not see? You didn't see an expert come in here and dispute Dr. Wood or Dr. Ison. We've had almost 4 years this case has been pending. Almost 4 years. You know what the state has potentially as resources. Did they go and talk to somebody or not? I have no idea. But over a 4-year period, when we get to the end here, I'll tell you what didn't happen. Not a single forensic psychologist got up there and said Dr. Wood was wrong or Dr. Ison was wrong. That was not in the rebuttal. I think you know why. Our burden was to present to you by clear and convincing evidence that Mr. Reinking suffered from a severe mental disease or defect, and that as a result of that, or because of that, he did not understand that what he was doing was wrong. And we have met that burden. We've met that burden starting back in 2015, 16, 17 with the schizophrenia. They really don't dispute that part of it at all. And we've met the burden by showing that Mr. Reinking was in a crazy state of mind at the time that this happened, believing delusions and hallucinations and disorganized thoughts. Again, it's hard to understand. I don't know that anybody can understand it unless you are him. But that's what happened in this case. You know, we have to show as a result of, did the schizophrenia result in this actions that he didn't know were wrong? Well, what else would have caused it? There is nothing else that would have caused it. The schizophrenia resulted in his actions, and he did not understand and appreciate the wrongfulness of his actions. I want to say just a couple more things before I close. First, I want to talk about sympathy. There's not a person in this room that doesn't have sympathy for Mr. Perez and his family, Mr. Sanderlin and his family, Aquila De Silva and family, Ebony Groves and the family, for Miss Wagner, Miss Henderson, and everybody else that was in the Waffle House. These victims and their families suffered and are continuing to suffer. Monday and first thing Tuesday morning were two of the toughest days in my career to listen to that. You can have sympathy. We all sympathize. But in making your decision, the judge is going to tell you you can have no prejudice or sympathy or allow anything but the law and the evidence to influence your verdict. So you can have sympathy, we all do, but you can't come up with a verdict based on that. That's our law. When you go back to deliberate, you talk to each other, but the 12 of you that will remain on the jury, you each have the right to make your own decision in what you think is the right decision in this case. You have to respect the opinions of the others, but you each have your own right to make your own decision, whatever that is. At the beginning, when we did the jury selection, I asked each of you, if we carry our burden of proving by clear and convincing evidence that Mr. Reinking suffered from a severe mental disease or defect, that being schizophrenia, and that as a result of that, he could not appreciate the wrongfulness of his actions, would any of you hesitate to check that box that says not guilty by reason of insanity? And every one of you said, no, we wouldn't hesitate in doing that. If you meet your burden, we'll check not guilty by reason of insanity. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've met our burden. We've brought you the proof. Now we're asking you to find him not guilty by reason of insanity. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Jury, we're going to...
Did they meet their burden? Is the jury persuaded? We're going to hear from the state, their rebuttal, after the break.